I became a ghost to my own son, and he didn't even notice. My name is Eleanor, and I'm 62. Sometimes I wonder, when did I stop being a person and turn into a shadow, an emotional servant to my Ethan? From the moment he was born, my life revolved around him like a vine. I left my favorite job, buried my dreams of a new life after the divorce, learned to be content with little, all so that he would have the best. I remember how my heart would skip a beat when he handed me his report card, and he wouldn't even look at me at that moment. I believed that one day he would appreciate my sacrifices, but that day never came. For years, I toiled away, cleaning other people's houses, swallowing grievances and humiliations, so that Ethan would want for nothing. He grew up seeing my back bending under the burden of fatigue, but never once offered help. When he studied to become an architect and began to build a career, I was so full of pride that it drowned out any physical pain. But soon I noticed how his voice changed in phone conversations, how rare his visits became, how short and cold our conversations were. Involuntarily, I was becoming a burden to him. I remember once, over coffee in his impeccable apartment, he suddenly, as if in passing, declared, "Mom, you're holding me back." The words cut into me sharper than daggers. There was no screaming, no cursing, just icy calm, as if he were stating a banal fact, as if I were an annoying obstacle in his dizzying rise. I looked at him and didn't recognize my Ethan. Before me stood only a man whom I had raised in boundless love, and now he saw in me only an obstacle. In that moment, something broke within me. I didn't utter a word, just lowered my eyes, but inside, another Eleanor was already awakening, one that had languished for years under the yoke of self-sacrifice. Sitting in a chair with cooling coffee in my hands, I imagined everything I would ever say to him. He didn't yet know that my silence was over. His careless phrase became the spark that ignited a fire. And what was destined to happen would be a lesson he would never forget. From that fateful day, a crack ran between us. Ethan no longer showered me with warm messages and calls to find out how I was doing. Every word turned into a protocol, a list of things created for his convenience. One day he asked me not to leave comments on his social media anymore. "Colleagues don't understand," he explained. "Why does my mother express herself like some commoner?" These words hurt me deeper than I could have imagined. He was erasing me from his life piece by piece, as if I had never existed in his flawless professional world. I began to notice that he was hiding me. When unexpected guests arrived, he would whisper, "Please, stay in the kitchen." At family gatherings, he introduced me simply as Eleanor, omitting the word mother. Once, in the presence of his partner, he stated that I had raised him alone because his father had left early. He said it with such tragic pathos, as if it were a heartbreaking story that had steeled his character. Not a word about the pain, about the tears we had shed together. He was creating new versions of his life, where I was only a ghostly shadow. The thought of leaving his house swirled in my brain, but something inside desperately clung to hope. It wasn't love, but rather a painful desire to be seen by him again. I humiliated myself, cooking his favorite dishes, setting the table with maniacal care, in the vain hope of hearing at least a word of praise. But in response, only silence. When he returned at midnight, ignoring my greeting, I forced a smile, pretending that everything was fine. But in the silence of my room, every night, I cried like a lost child. I, who had given him my all, had become a ghost to him. One night, overhearing his conversation in the hallway, I heard him whisper to his beloved, "I need to get rid of my mother. I'm ashamed that she's still here." My body froze. The air seemed to thicken, constricting my chest, and my heart stopped for a moment. No tears, no screams, just a deafening resolve and clenched teeth. It won't end like this. He didn't yet know that I already had the strength to wipe that smug smile off his face, and this is just the beginning. The next morning, I got up at dawn, as usual, made his favorite breakfast, and left it on the table. Ethan didn't even bother to come down. He just sent a message, "No time. Meeting." An icy void formed in my stomach, not from hunger, from a destroyed habit. Cooking for him was the only way to feel needed, but on this day something inside broke. "I won't do it anymore." Deciding to get some fresh air and escape from this oppressive atmosphere, I went for a walk. Passing by the bakery, the very one where we bought sweets when Ethan was little, I involuntarily froze. My exhausted face was reflected in the window. I wonder if he remembers those happy moments? Or did he bury them along with me, the former me? Instinctively, I bought a couple of sweet buns, an old habit, a foolish hope that he would notice the gesture. But he didn't. That evening, as he was having his dinner ordered from an app, I gathered my courage and asked, "Ethan, do you need me to stay here?" He looked at me with complete incomprehension, as if I were speaking Martian. In an icy tone, he replied, "You can stay if you keep the place tidy." And then it hit me like a jolt of electricity. I'm not his mother. I'm a free servant. He doesn't need me out of love, not out of habit, but purely for convenience. I exist as long as I cater to his needs. Silently, I went up to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and opened an old box with papers dear to my heart. Among the yellowed letters was a copy of a document. A document he had forgotten. A document that would change everything. He naively believed I was destitute, that I had nothing. How wrong he was. I hold a power he doesn't even suspect. And when I unleash it, his world will crumble to dust. The days dragged on in a dreary routine. Ethan would appear and disappear, as if I were just part of the furniture, nothing more. Sometimes he would pointedly ignore me. At other times, he would throw out dry, curt phrases, as if talking to a stranger. I remained silent, not out of powerlessness, but because I was learning. I observed his every gesture, every glance, trying to decipher what he was so carefully hiding. My son, whom I raised with love and tenderness, had turned into an egoist, convinced that everyone owed him, giving nothing in return. One day, he burst into the house, beaming with a smile I hadn't seen on his face in a long time. With him was a young woman, elegant and haughty. She cast a fleeting, dismissive glance at me, barely acknowledging me with a greeting. Ethan began showing her around the house as if it were his sole property, not saying a word about how every inch of this land was bought at the cost of my efforts, my sleepless nights, my years of grueling labor. I distinctly heard him say smugly, "Soon we'll transfer it to us." It's just a formality, the words cut into me like shards of ice. In that moment, I realized how far his insidious plan extended. Memory took me back to that night when they were sitting in the living room, laughing hypocritically. Slowly, as if in a fog, I went up to my room and turned on the table lamp, as if summoning light to my side. With trembling hands, I took out the cherished document that I had guarded like the apple of my eye. The deed to the house, where I was listed as the sole owner, a secret I had protected. I trusted him implicitly, believed that betrayal was impossible. But now this paper is my unbreakable shield. While they were weaving their webs, dreaming of taking over everything, I was already building a plan of retribution, cherishing a revenge that would return to them 100-fold. The silence in which I lived had made him dizzy. Blinded by pride, he thought I was a weak, defenseless old woman, a puppet in his hands. But he is one step away from discovering the terrible truth: my strength is in my silence, in the years I have accumulated it. And when a mother rises to defend herself, no ungrateful son will escape retribution. The next morning, Ethan, with feigned politeness, asked me to sign some papers. In his eyes, I could see the anticipation of victory, but he didn't yet know that he had fallen into a trap that he himself had set. He claimed that these papers were necessary to simplify the payment of utility bills. His gaze avoided mine, his finger impatiently pointing to the place for the signature. I took the pen, pretended to carefully study the text, but then raised my eyes and looked at him intently. In his eyes, there was not just foolish stubbornness, but undisguised impatience. He didn't care what I was reading, he craved blind obedience. He gave me a saccharine smile, the kind they give to those from whom they no longer expect any benefit. I didn't sign. Calmly said that I would check everything carefully first. I noticed how his face twisted slightly in annoyance. He must have decided that my old age was his chance to get what I had created all my life. He saw in me only a weak, tired woman, incapable of resistance. But it was his fatal mistake to assume that age had deprived me of my character. He didn't understand that age had given me something else. Strategy. And I intended to use it with all my might. That evening, alone in my room, I sat down to write a letter. Not for him, for myself. Every word in the letter rang like an alarm bell, reminding me of the sacrifices, the years crossed out of life, the unfulfilled dreams, the sleepless nights, full of worries about my son's future. Every letter confirmed the bitter truth that I already knew. Enough giving, it's time to take back what's mine. Not out of malice or revenge, but out of a sense of self-worth. That all-forgiving, loving mother is no more. Now speaks a woman who has gone through fire and survived. I hid the letter, along with the original house deed, and for the first time in weeks, a genuine smile appeared on my face. The game, in which he considered himself an all-powerful puppeteer, was about to take such a turn that he would choke with surprise. And this time I wasn't going to warn him. Because there are lessons that are only learned when life stops being generous and begins to ruthlessly take away. A few days later, Ethan hosted a dinner party at home for his colleagues. He asked me not to make noise or show myself to them. He said he wanted to make an impression as a modern, successful professional, and apparently, I didn't fit into that image. He said it calmly, even with a kind of feigned kindness, as if he was doing me a favor, but in reality, he was just pushing me aside, like an old, tiresome piece of furniture, before the arrival of important guests. His eyes showed disdain, and his voice, condescension, and it stung me more than harsh words. That day, something inside me broke irrevocably. I locked myself in my room, deafened by their laughter, their clinking toasts, their plans, full of dizzying prospects. Not a single question about me. No one even suspected that the woman who had created comfort and supported this house for decades was locked upstairs, like an unnecessary shadow. I peeked through the crack in the door and saw his radiant smile. He was happy, as if I had never existed in his life. He traded his mother for his ambitions without the slightest hesitation. When the festive dinner subsided and silence reigned in the house again, I, like a ghost, went downstairs and aimlessly wandered among the dirty dishes. The air was thick with the smell of wine, expensive perfume, and contempt. I sat down on a chair in front of the still uncleared table and thought about what I had sacrificed for them. Would he ever open his eyes? Would he understand what he had done? But I no longer waited for his repentance, only justice. Quiet, inexorable, and devastating justice. That same night, I made a call. Not to a lawyer, and not to a friend. I called a person whom Ethan didn't even suspect existed, a person to whom I was infinitely dear, because, as he mistakenly believed, I had sacrificed everything for him. There is a chapter in my life that Ethan had no idea about, and now it returns to help me get mine back. The call was short, but it was as if sparks flew from it. On the other end of the line, the voice sounded respectful and warm. He said that he still remembered my kindness to his mother when she was at her worst. He offered help unconditionally. He only asked for trust. I hung up the phone, my heart was pounding, but not from fear, but from a feeling that I hadn't experienced in ages. Hope. Ethan thought I was alone in this world, but he was deeply mistaken. The next morning, I behaved as usual. I made breakfast, cleaned the kitchen, trying not to attract attention. He had no idea. I saw him rushing out of the house, talking on the phone as if the existence of the universe depended on his words. I sat down on the sofa and looked around the house, every corner, created by my work and sweat. He walks on this earth like a master. But very soon he will understand that not everything you step on belongs to you. Sometimes the roots go much deeper than it seems at first glance. I visited the bank to put my papers in order. I strengthened the protection of my property, left written instructions, clear, indisputable. My name was there, where it should have been, in every document, on every account, in every decision. It wasn't revenge, it was foresight. If he suddenly decides to commit the final act of betrayal, he will face an impregnable legal wall. A wall that he cannot break because he had no idea that I also know how to play. And I possess truly angelic patience. Returning home, I found Ethan, animatedly chatting on the phone about an upcoming move to a new apartment, of course, with his lover. He glanced at me, full of smug confidence, the look of a person convinced that he has the situation completely under control. I answered him with a calm, imperturbable look. And kept silent. If only he knew that every word of his was just confirmation that my plan was developing exactly as I intended. Perhaps then he wouldn't be so talkative. In the following days, Ethan seemed intoxicated by his impunity. He began to give me errands, demanded that I always be home, in case he needed something urgently. Each of his instructions sounded polite, but his voice was tinged with disdain. I was no longer his mother, but had turned into free help. I obeyed, of course, but with each time more reluctantly. He naively believed that he was keeping me in check, mistaking my silence for submission. The poor man, he didn't understand me at all. One day, his lover showed up, clutching some kind of folder in her hands. They locked themselves in his room and talked for several hours. I didn't approach, but snippets of phrases reached me: documentation, translation, paperwork. They had no idea that this very folder had already been in my hands. A few weeks ago, he thrust the papers at me under the guise of a favor, trying to deprive me of everything with a single stroke of the pen. But I had already taken countermeasures. His signature was never there. Only my smile and my silence. When they came out, they acted as if nothing had happened. They offered me coffee, asked how I was feeling, feigned concern. I responded politely, even thanked them for their attention. I knew they were testing the waters, assessing how far they could go. Ethan looked at me with a smug grin, like a player confident of his victory. I allowed him to indulge in this illusion. After all, there's something they always underestimate in women my age. My memory is my faithful ally. I don't forget, I wait, and I know exactly when to strike the crushing blow. That evening, I opened the envelope handed to me by the person from the bank. Inside were certified copies of all my assets. I studied them page by page with cold focus, as if lovingly sharpening a blade before battle. Soon it will be time to put them into action. Ethan slept peacefully beside me, unaware that he was teetering on the very edge of the abyss, and I was the only one holding the ground from collapsing. The next morning, Ethan seemed like a different person. Attention, courtesy, even a kind of affected tenderness shone through in every movement. He offered to take me to the mall, buy me something beautiful, pamper me. His voice had that warm, guilty tone he used as a child when he broke something and feared punishment. I pretended to be surprised, gave him a smile, and agreed. But I felt in my gut that there was a hidden motive behind every gesture, and this time his goal was particularly vile: to confuse me. During our walk, he asked strange questions. He wondered if I remembered where I kept important papers, if I had been having any problems with my memory lately. Subtle but dangerous hints. He was trying to make me doubt my own sanity. In his eyes, there was a disgusting triumph, as if he already saw me losing my footing. But he miscalculated. I was ready for this game. A quiet laugh rippled inside me. Here it is, his new tactic, to portray me as senile, infirm, incapable of sound decisions. If he can convince others that my mind is weakening, he can seize everything, supposedly for my own good. Hypocrite. Upon returning home, he handed me a sleeping pill. "This will help you rest better, dear," he purred in a falsely caring tone. I took the pill, placed it on the bedside table, and didn't touch it. That night, sleep eluded me. I sat by the window, staring into the darkness and listening to his footsteps, echoing in the silence of the house. Memories flooded my mind: how I nursed him during his fevers, how I pretended everything was fine just to avoid disturbing him. And now he is trying to annul me, erase me, deprive me of myself. But he missed one important detail. I'm still here. And more vigilant than ever before. I hid the pill, as proof of his treachery. I recorded his every word, every gesture, every attempt at manipulation. He thought he was playing alone, but he didn't know that I had already entered my own game. And the final move was much closer than he could imagine. The next morning, Ethan found me in the kitchen studying some papers. His face showed a mixture of surprise and anxiety. He pretended to be interested, asking what I was doing. I replied evenly, with feigned serenity, sorting things out. Just in case I ever decide to leave. In an instant, his face contorted, as if a mask had fallen off. He hissed that I shouldn't bother, that I was perfectly fine in this house, that everyone knew I wouldn't survive on my own. For the first time, I met his gaze without flinching. No more fear. No more trepidation. He haunted me around the house like a ghost, as if possessed by a desire to control my every move. He bombarded me with plans for the future, told me how his life would be transformed, how I should adjust to his rhythm. Every word sounded like a belated excuse, like a cowardly attempt to mask guilt with ostentatious concern. I remained silent, allowing him to pour out his soul, knowing that very soon all these words would turn into empty sound. The power he cherished so much, the power he thought he had over me, was nothing more than an illusion. That same day, I went to my lawyer. I brought all the documents, property deeds, evidence of his manipulations, statements from secret bank accounts. The lawyer listened without interrupting, only nodding occasionally. In his eyes, there was a mixture of admiration and fury. What they did to you is an abomination, unforgivable under any circumstances, his voice sounded like the tolling of a bell. But I swear, we will do everything to ensure this atrocity does not go unpunished. Never. At that moment, I felt the icy shell of loneliness that had been binding me begin to crack. Ethan was waiting for me at home. His face, usually so open, was now twisted with displeasure. "Where have you been?" he snapped, not looking me in the eye. "Finishing things," I replied evenly, trying not to betray the storm raging inside. He was silent, but I could see the anxiety flickering in his eyes, which he was trying so hard to hide. Poor Ethan, he didn't yet realize that this day would mark the beginning of the end of his deceitful game. It was at that moment that the fear that had held me in its grip for years receded, giving way to a cold, calculating determination to shatter his world. It all started with an ordinary letter from the bank. A notification of suspicious activity on an old account that I hadn't used in a long time. Intuition told me something was wrong. Requesting a statement, I received a blow that took my breath away. Someone had transferred a large sum from my account to another, opened in Ethan's name. He had used my personal information, my passwords, and forged my electronic signature. My son, whom I had raised with love and care, had stolen from me. I sat, staring motionlessly at the computer screen, and felt the world around me shrink, turning into a crushing, suffocating cocoon. It wasn't about the money, although the amount was significant. It was about the cynical audacity, the betrayal that tore my heart apart. The abuse of trust. A series of memories flashed through my mind, every saved cent, put aside for a comfortable old age, every cutback on food, every small sacrifice for the future. And he just took it as a matter of course, as if my efforts meant nothing, as if I myself had ceased to exist. The pain subsided, replaced by a searing flame of rage that pierced me like a lightning strike. That same day, gathering all my willpower, I went straight to the bank. My demand was the immediate blocking of all accounts, enhanced security, and the signing of restrictions. No one, not even my own son, should have access to my money, that was my clear instruction. The manager was saying something in an apologetic tone, but I didn't care. All I wanted was to regain control of my life. In the reflection of the mirror in the bank's restroom, I saw a stranger. No longer was there that submissive, silent woman. Before me stood another, strong, resolute, and ready for action. Returning home, I put on a mask of serenity. Ethan asked me if he needed to buy anything at the supermarket. "No, thank you, dear," I replied with a strained smile. But inside me, there was no longer a loving mother. Now I am his quiet, but dangerous enemy. And he will feel it very soon. The days dragged on, Ethan continued to play the role of a caring son, unaware of the storm brewing inside me. He suddenly began to show interest in things he had never cared about before. He offered to drive me to the doctor, checked my prescriptions, even tried to sort my pills. And all this with such a strained, fake smile that it was physically painful to look at. This no longer felt like care, it was pure control. He needed to know my every step, every decision. But he couldn't imagine that his every action was only bringing him closer to the abyss. I documented absolutely everything. Saved screenshots of his messages, emails, bank transfers. Recorded his venomous comments on a hidden phone. I had documented his every word, even those moments when he, supposedly jokingly, hinted that I was too old to make important financial decisions. He was cautious, certainly, but not nearly as much as he thought. Each of his phrases became another piece of the trap he was weaving for himself. And I was just patiently holding the rope, waiting for the right moment to let it go. One morning, his girlfriend rushed in, all worked up. She was speaking quietly, almost in a whisper, but I could hear everything perfectly from the hallway. She was muttering something about a frozen account and some oddities at the bank. Ethan tried to calm her down, but his voice trembled betrayingly. Fear flashed in his eyes. Slowly, as if in slow motion, I climbed the stairs, pretending to be deaf to everything that was happening. Passing by their figures, I offered a quiet, gentle greeting. In response, only a strained grimace, a pathetic parody of a smile. I could feel their hesitation, their fear of asking a question, as if I already knew the answer. And, in truth, I really did know everything. That night, I opened the old safe, hidden under a heavy closet. Inside, like snakes in a nest, lay a letter from my lawyer, a signed statement, and a thick envelope with a single name, Ethan. This envelope will remain untouched for now, but when the seal is broken, it will be a point of no return. He never understood that you can wound a mother, but the humiliation of a woman does not go unpunished. He woke a sleeping beast. That day, I sat on the terrace, inhaling the scent of tea and watching the play of shadows in the garden. Ethan had driven off with his paramour on an important business meeting, as he called it. But I knew their path led straight to the notary. They had found the right person to initiate the usufruct procedure. Their goal was as clear as a tear, to force me to sign the fateful document that would eventually turn them into the full owners of my home. They thought they had the situation under control. Poor, naive souls. When they returned, they acted as if nothing had happened. They brought me a package of sweet bread, chirping that they had remembered me. The bride, that saccharine snake, sat down next to me and began to sing in her cloying voice, which always made me sick. Eleanor, we have an idea here, how to make your life easier. A simple formality, so you can relax, and we'll take care of the paperwork. I listened, nodding almost imperceptibly, pretending to be interested. Ethan, the smug turkey, began to explain everything with such confidence, as if the matter was already settled. He spoke to me as if I were an object he had already appropriated. He even dared to say that signing these papers would be better for everyone. And then he uttered a phrase that I could never swallow, Mom, you don't need to think so much. You've already lived your life. Now entrust the future to us. He said it with a laugh, as if it were a joke, but I didn't find it funny at all. It was a slap in the face, disguised as concern. He, naive, thought he had already won. I forced a smile. I said that I would think about it, that I needed time. They left satisfied, confident that they had me in their pocket. They couldn't imagine that I had a fateful meeting with a notary scheduled for that very day. But I wasn't going there to sign their insidious plans, but to erect an impregnable legal wall that would forever thwart any attempt to deprive me of my legal rights. Sometimes the most painful lesson is presented with a hypocritical smile and a treacherous contract in hand. On that fateful day, I slipped out of the house at dawn, without saying a word. On the kitchen table, they found, as usual, the breakfast I had prepared and a short note, I'll be back late, don't wait up. My steps in the city center were firm and resolute. At the notary's office, they were already waiting for me. The legal protection was thought out to the smallest detail, restrictions on inheritance, clauses excluding any transfer of rights without my personal, notarized consent. I signed the documents with an unwavering calm that comes only from confidence in one's righteousness. When I returned home, Ethan was already waiting for me in the living room with a frown. His fiancée sat next to him, irritably staring at her phone. There was undisguised suspicion in his voice when he asked where I had been. I answered him with the same icy detachment that he had so generously given me lately, on my own business. Rage flared up in him instantly. He roared that I had no right to just disappear, that we, you see, had a lot of urgent matters that required my attention. For the first time, I looked him straight in the eye and challenged him, "What kind of business, Ethan? Your exorbitant ambitions or my approaching old age?" He was silent, but that look. It was worth 1,000 words. The mask of a caring son was torn off, revealing his true face. He burst into a scream, accusing me of incomprehensible suspicion, assuring me that he only wanted to help. His fiancée, who had been silent until then, jumped up and said with irritation, "Ethan, leave her alone. If she doesn't want to sign, let her deal with it herself later, when she can't even walk." My chest tightened painfully, but not from resentment, but from a suddenly awakened strength. I finally saw their real faces, without falsehood and pretense. That same night, while they slept peacefully, I put an envelope on his desk. The one I had carefully kept for the past few weeks. Inside was a letter from my lawyer, officially notifying them of the deprivation of the right to dispose of my property. Neither now, nor in the future. And a warning, any attempt to exert pressure will result in criminal prosecution. The battle they naively thought they had won was just beginning. The next morning, the house shook with Ethan's scream. He found the envelope. I heard him curse furiously, his fist crashing down on the table, and things flying onto the floor. His fiancée, like a frightened bird, tried to calm his anger, but he was relentless. Going up the stairs, I tried to maintain external composure, although my heart was pounding in my chest. I found him with a face flushed with anger and a crazy gleam in his eyes. Handing me the letter with a trembling hand, he growled, "What does this mean, Mom? What other betrayal?" Without looking away, looking him straight in the eye with a challenge, I replied, "This is protection. Protection from a person from whom I no longer expect love, but only pain." For a moment, he was stunned, as if struck by lightning. Silence was broken by the venomous voice of his fiancée, "She's just gone crazy. She needs help." "The only help I need is for you to disappear," I retorted, never breaking eye contact. "I want both of you out of my house. Today." Ethan exploded. He hurled insults, calling me selfish, an ungrateful wretch. Then, as if signing his own death warrant, he uttered, "You'd have nothing if it weren't for me." I simply laughed in response. It was a bitter, broken laugh, full of pain, yet laced with truth. Because I knew for a fact, everything I had created myself. Every single bit of it. They didn't vanish that instant, of course. They made pathetic attempts at resistance, but the legal ground had crumbled beneath their feet. In a rage, they began packing, throwing things around with fury, creating an unimaginable racket, muttering curses through clenched teeth. I sat in the kitchen, slowly sipping coffee, and for the first time in years, I felt a long-awaited peace. The house, once an epicenter of tension, seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The air felt crystal clear. Each suitcase, thumping down the stairs, removed a brick from the wall of guilt I had erected around myself for decades. When they finally crossed the threshold, Ethan cast one last look at me. There was no more pleading, no more rage, only icy contempt. Spitting out the words like venom, he hissed, "You'll end up alone?" I replied, without a flicker of emotion, "I'd prefer solitude to living in the company of the poison you brought into this house." And at that very moment, watching them leave, carrying their boxes and their ominous silence, I realized it with absolute certainty. That day, they ceased to be my family. 2 weeks have passed since they left. The silence that had settled in the house became a healing balm for my wounded soul. For the first time in years, I felt free within the walls of my own home. There was no longer that oppressive feeling of being watched, judged for every move. I breathed life into my room, tidied up, threw open the windows to the sun, got rid of the old furniture, and decorated the space with fresh flowers. I tackled the little things I had always put off, as if making up for lost time. Freedom was intoxicating, but at the same time I felt on edge. Intuition told me, Ethan wasn't one to accept defeat. I knew him too well to believe in his retreat. And my premonition didn't deceive me. One morning, the postman delivered a court summons. Ethan had initiated proceedings to have me declared emotionally unstable. The goal was obvious, to seize my property, hypocritically claiming that I was incapable of managing it. I read every word in the document with chilling composure. He didn't even suspect that I was several steps ahead. This dirty trick wouldn't work. Without wasting a moment, I called my lawyer and sent him copies of the documents. Fortunately, he already had a case prepared, supported by medical opinions, notarized testimonies, and psychological reports. The proof of my crystal-clear mind was undeniable. While Ethan tried to smear my name with dirt, I parried each of his attacks with evidence as pure as a teardrop. He had nowhere to hide, no legal loopholes left, only despair, pathetically disguised as a strategy. He was playing with fire, and I already had a spark in my hand, ready to ignite. That same day, I signed the documents for the sale of the old house, a property I had almost forgotten about. It suddenly transformed into fresh capital, elegantly replenishing my account. Not out of dire need, but simply, to make a point. When a woman decides to turn the page with dignity, she sends the world a clear signal, she never needed anyone to shine. And that was just the beginning. With the money from the sale, I took an action I had never even considered before. I purchased property in one of the most prestigious areas of the city. Not to show off, no. It was a symbol. I needed to prove, first and foremost to myself, that I wasn't broken, that I wasn't a burden, that I was still capable of forging my own destiny. I chose this apartment for its sun-drenched rooms, a balcony with a soothing view, and the desired silence. Luxury wasn't my goal, only peace. And I paid for that peace, but it was worth it. When the contract was signed, I was asked to take a photo for the building's archive. Walking through the showroom, I suddenly froze, seeing a familiar face. It was Ethan's sister-in-law. Her gaze, full of surprise, bordered on horror. "You're buying here," she said, her voice laced with undisguised mockery. I simply smiled, took out my phone, and showed her the bank confirmation. The news of my purchase, like lightning, reached Ethan through his circle. And then it began. First, a call. I ignored it. Then came the emails, full of conciliatory tones, as if nothing had happened. And finally, a bouquet of flowers with a note, "We can talk when you're ready. I love you, Ethan." There was no reply. Without a second thought, I threw the flowers into the trash. Why reopen an old wound? Soon, comments started pouring in on social media. Ethan began posting ambiguous messages, portraying himself as the victim. They say when mothers come into money, they sometimes forget about their children. This ingratitude stings. I wasn't offended. I just smiled sadly because it was the clearest sign of his defeat. Talking so no one would hear you, crying so no one would believe your tears. He lost everything and still didn't understand why. One afternoon, I left my new house to run errands. When I returned, I saw him. Ethan stood at the entrance, dressed in an elegant suit but with sunken eyes. He was silent, simply extending his hand as if expecting me to take it. I just stared at him. "What are you doing here?" I asked, not softening my voice. "I just wanted to see you," he replied. There wasn't a trace of arrogance in him, not a hint of sincere remorse, only fear. Fear of being left behind in my life forever. He asked to talk. We went to the nearest cafe. Without hesitation, he began his speech about how it was all a misunderstanding, that he only wanted to protect me, that he went a little too far, but his eyes couldn't lie. It wasn't guilt that gnawed at him, but despair. Despair from losing control, from realizing that the money was gone forever. And then it dawned on me. He wasn't looking for me, but for what I had once given him. I picked up my bag and left a sealed folder on the table. "This is the only thing you'll get from me," I said, looking him straight in the eye. Inside was my renunciation of any future inheritance, notarized. There was also a detailed list of all the expenses I had incurred for him during his 30 years of life. The sum was astronomical. I said he could consider it the closing of an emotional, financial, and moral debt. I showed him what it means to truly lose. He was silent, staring at the papers as if his soul had faded. I got up, headed for the door, and before leaving, cast one last look at him. Now yes, Ethan, you are alone. Just like you always wanted. I didn't turn around. I didn't feel guilty, only calm certainty. What I did wasn't revenge, but justice. After that meeting, Ethan disappeared. I never heard from him again and didn't try to find him. I deleted his number, destroyed the photos, slammed shut the inner doors behind which he had lived in my heart for years. I did it not out of hatred, but for the sake of healing. For over half a century, I had given myself to everyone but myself. And now, finally, I am free. And this freedom wasn't accompanied by applause or congratulations. It came in silence, in peace, in a space where you can breathe deeply. I began to fill my days with the little things I had previously ignored. I signed up for painting lessons, walked through parks without rushing. I cooked for myself with love. I didn't need anyone to tell me thank you. My greatest reward is feeling that every step I take belongs to me, not dictated by someone else's whims. I regained my reflection, my tastes, my boundaries. I became my own home, my own refuge, my own destiny. One evening, as I was watering my flowers, a neighbor approached me. She said that it was clear I had gone through something very difficult, but also something incredibly liberating. I smiled at her. She saw me as strong, radiant, and that was enough. I no longer needed to explain the past. I didn't need to justify decisions that had caused pain. Yes, they hurt, but they also saved me. And this salvation didn't come from the outside, it was born within me. I sat in a chair on the balcony, feeling the warmth of the sun on my skin. Closing my eyes, I listened to my breathing. For the first time in a long time. This sound wasn't filled with fatigue, it breathed life. My life. After so many years of self-denial, after the role of mother, servant, martyr, I finally became Eleanor again. And Eleanor belongs to herself. Sometimes I am asked if I regret it, if I was too cruel, cutting off my own son, if I should have waited, forgiven a little more. But when I ask myself this question, looking in the mirror, the answer is always the same. No, I don't regret loving. I regret being silent. And when I stopped being silent, I didn't become cruel, I simply learned to survive. Ethan became my most painful lesson. He taught me that not every seed bears fruit and that even the purest love can turn into a knife if given without measure. For years, I fed him, clothed him, supported him, and in return, he wanted to erase me. But he didn't succeed, because, perhaps, he had power for a while, but he never possessed my essence. It always belonged to me. And with that, I rose from the ground. Today I live in peace with myself, not bathing in luxury, but possessing a treasure far more valuable, self-respect. What was taken from me, humiliating me to the depths of my soul, I returned to myself, cloaked in dignity. What I wept in tears, I resurrected in myself, tempered in courage. What I was denied, deprived of love, I generously give myself every day, not putting it off until later. I don't wait for apologies, nor do I crave revenge. I only pray that no woman ever gives herself completely without realizing that her voice carries as much weight as her sacrifice. And to those who throw stones of judgment at me, I will say only one thing: I was not a perfect mother. I was human. I loved, I fell, I shattered into pieces, but I found the strength to rise. And if I've learned anything in my 62 years, it's that there is no victory sweeter than getting back on your feet when everyone around you has written you off. After all, in the end, I didn't lose him, he lost the mother who was ready to give him everything, but he didn't see it.